Good morning and welcome to a very special edition of the weekly Texas Public Policy Foundation live stream. I'm Kevin Roberts, your host, and as you can tell, joined by a great American patriot, now distinguished senior fellow of the Hudson Institute, and of course, the 70th Secretary of State of the United States of America, Mike Pompeo. Thanks for joining us, sir.
It's great to be with you today. Thanks for having me.
Well, as you and I were just chatting before we came online, you've got a schedule here in Texas talking about the great things the Trump administration did. What you and I are going to talk about today are some troubling things, frankly. Our audience knows, and most of them tuning in from outside Texas, that we will cover every major policy issue facing us with smiles on our faces. But that means, and I think you personified this in your career, that we diagnose those problems very candidly so that we can come up with solutions. So I just want to ask you a couple of 30,000-foot questions, if you don't mind. Here you are a few months after serving as Secretary of State. You're observing the world. You're observing the new administration. What's your assessment of America's strategic position in the world now?
So it's an important question. And without getting into the dynamics of the two administrations, I must say, I traveled to some 80 countries in 2.5 years more before that when I was the CIA director. People are dying for leadership from the United States of America. They want us to be there. They know that we are the bulwark of security for every country in the world. We are the bulwark of economic security. We're the bulwark of diplomatic capacity and power. And of course, we have an unrivaled military capability as well. So wherever I went, wherever I landed, they wanted to see me. They didn't want to see Mike. They wanted to see the Secretary of State for the United States of America who could help them. We shouldn't squander that. And that means two things. One, we can't disengage. We have to be very restrained in how we think about using this power. It is not infinite. It is not free. It has an enormous cost to the United States when we use it. But if we do it right, if we think about it the way the president and I did, which was we put America first, we're unabashed about saying that I swore an oath to defend the United States of America, and that is our first priority. If we're unabashed about that, the countries will respect it, and they will come alongside of us and want to be our partners, friends, allies, economic trading partners. They know that the way we think about the world is the right way, and I hope this next administration will continue that and not sacrifice American values on the cross of climate change or radical woke leftism or whatever it may be that is the mantra from the left part of their party.
Well, we have a vested interest, in spite of whatever our philosophical differences may be with the new administration, for them to succeed, especially in foreign policy. And I think one of the things that the Trump administration and you did very well was being remarkably consistent in foreign policy. And I think that y'all had some folks who might have been skeptics early on in the Trump administration who came around to your way of thinking. And that happens when you're leading. It happens when you're consistent. One follow-up question I have before we move on to the couple of specific issues of China and Mexico is, as you were traveling the world as Secretary of State, did you ever get significant pushback in private from world leaders about the America First policy?
Almost done.
Yeah.
When I got it, it was from our adversaries, not those.
Good, that's a good sign.
Not those who wanted to be friends of America. And the pushback against America, which people understood it intrinsically. People understood it, and we were very candid too. We said when I met with Chancellor Merkel or whoever it was, you should be Germany first.
Amen.
You should, when I meet with the President of the Dominican Republic, you should care about the DR first, and we admire that and we respect that, and it is your job. And so it was that central understanding that we took, and we're just very candid about. But when you do that, when you're open about who you are and what it is you're trying to accomplish, you can really get to the heart of the challenges that are represented around the world.
Well, I think that's hopefully some inspiration for folks who are now in the shoes you used to fill there. We have some concern here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation about two of the dynamics you mentioned. They using climate change as sort of the context in which we do foreign policy, and also the leftist wokeness. And I'm grateful for you and your continuing leadership outside office now to be pushing on that. So let's pivot, if you don't mind, Mr. Secretary, to a couple of specific issues. Those of us who follow the news closely, especially those of us in Texas, are concerned about two foreign policy issues. One, not just close to Texas, but adjacent to us, and that's Mexico. We'll turn to that second. I really want, especially for our audience outside Texas, to hear your thoughts about what's going on with China right now. It's obviously a very high-profile meeting in the last few days in Alaska. I'll ask you about that from this layman's point of view. It didn't look like it went well for the United States, but we'd love your assessment about that. But before we get into the specifics, what's China doing? I think most of our audience, as they were sending in some questions early, believe that China has lapped us. that the United States is now in second place, so to speak. How would you respond to that?
So I don't believe for a moment that we're in second place, but there's a real risk of that.
Okay.
And let me walk through how I think we got to where we are and our theory of the case on how we make sure that the next generation is dominated by a Western set of thought, a set of rules-based order that we know and that our founders wanted us to have here in the United States of America. For 4 decades, Republicans and Democrats alike thought that engagement with China would be a solution, that we'd see them change their ways, not necessarily even their internal dynamic. We have a lot of tolerance for countries that have different systems inside of the country, but we thought that they'd become less hostile, that they would engage in the world and trade on a set of rules that we understood. And when they made promises internationally, whether that was about the South China Sea or Hong Kong or Taiwan or Tibet, that they'd live up to them. And all we needed to do was trade just a little bit more with them. That proved an enormous failure, proved a central misunderstanding of the world, and most importantly of the Chinese Communist Party and its leader today, Xi Jinping. President Trump and I stared at this and said, that's just nuts. I'm trying to simplify this for this morning. That doesn't make any sense. It has failed. We have to go a different direction. We have to protect American workers. So we started with trade. The president talked about this during his campaign. We said, no, we're going to trade on a fair and reciprocal basis with every country, and that must therefore include China. When it came to military issues, we're going to make sure we have the strongest military capable of defending the United States and the things that matter to economic commerce around the world. We're going to do that in a way that is restrained and appropriate. And we're going to very clearly lay out for the Chinese Communist Party that you can't come to dominate a region in a way that will deny Western ideology. So whether it was the World Trade Organization, or the World Health Organization, or at the United Nations, wherever it was we found China, or in Africa with the Belt and Road Initiative, I could go on. We pushed back in a real way. It was a blessing to have a president that was prepared to lead and take the risk that was associated with that. But we were serious about it. There wasn't an ambassador that worked for me anywhere in the world that didn't understand that their top priority may have been serving as a relation to the country that they were in. Their second priority was China. Yes, wherever it was they were, whether they were in Southeast Asia or Africa or the Middle East, they knew that China mattered to this president, to this administration, and that we needed to get this right.
Yeah, well, thanks for that analysis. I'm sure our audience appreciated it. A follow-up question to that, with a very brief caveat or context. You've struck me because I study leaders. One of the things we do here at the Foundation by how careful you've been in offering unsolicited advice to the new administration. That's a custom in this country that all of us, liberals, conservatives, folks in between, really ought to honor, and I'm grateful that you're doing that. The point is, if you were going to offer some advice, and you're going to do that as a friend, as a fellow patriot to President Biden and his administration, about what to do with China as a result of some of the remarks they made at this meeting in Alaska last week, what would that advice be?
So I am always careful. They're in the seat. I'm the former.
Sure.
I wish that they had treated us that way.
Yes.
Many of them chose not to do that, so be it. No need to retaliate for that. But I do want to offer them ideas about things that we saw that worked and things that we didn't. I've done that privately. But I've talked about publicly the way the United States needs to respond to China. And you know, the meetings in Anchorage present risk to the United States because the Chinese attacked the fundamental nature of the United States of America. So it wasn't about a moment or a particular language or particular words, but they grabbed onto what the Chinese believe most deeply, which is that America is a nation in decline.
Yeah.
And that thesis, one that they propagate through misinformation around the world and through different propaganda tools, the theory of American decline, is something I hope that Americans don't come to believe. It's fundamentally untrue. And we have to work at it. We have to make sure that it never becomes true. But it's fundamentally untrue. And the Chinese want the world to believe that, because if we're in decline, then other countries will want to be their friends. They'll be fearful that the United States won't be there to be their important partner. So I would urge this administration, when your Chinese counterpart says that Black Lives Matter is a central part of your administration, when a Marxist-Leninist ideology is a center point of your administration, you have to push back on that. If you don't, it may well be true. And I regret that they talked about the fact that they use these terms that were incredibly morally relativistic. The central idea that somehow America doesn't have a set of human rights understandings that are important, fundamentally different than the way the Chinese treat their own citizens. It's just wrong. So they grab headlines from the news. So they grab things that CNN says, they grab things that are in the New York Times, and they say, see, this is who America really is. Well, it's not true, and we can't let them get away with propagating that all around the world, because it will diminish us in the eyes of our allies and friends and create enormous problems building the coalition we all need to push back against these Marxist, socialist ideas that the Chinese Communist parties want to come dominate the next generation.
Sure, and